Join us today on Beyond the Lair, where we have a conversation with Ryan St. Germaine, founder of Indigenous Tech Circle. Ryan speaks about creating a circle to support, advance, educate, and inspire Indigenous tech entrepreneurs and companies. Hello and welcome to Beyond the Lair. My name is Gina Jackson Montgomery.
And my name is Dean Montgomery.
Welcome, welcome. We are so excited to have a very prominent guest and friend of ours, Ryan St. Germaine. Welcome, welcome. Really excited to have you here. You are the founder of Indigenous Tech Circle. A little bit for our guests and our viewers to know about Ryan is he is a serial entrepreneur, much like the rest of us, and Indigenous tech leader based in Vancouver, BC, where we live. And as a founder of Indigenous Tech Circle, he's built a community of over 300 Indigenous tech professionals across Canada and the US. Ryan's entrepreneurial journey includes co-founding and successfully selling BCjobs, Western Canada's largest job board, and currently serving as executive in residence at Raven Indigenous Capital Partners and program leader at New Ventures BC Indigenous Tech Founders Program. Big mouthful. He focuses on connecting startups, accelerations, and impact investors to cultivate a thriving Indigenous tech ecosystem. Welcome to our programming.
Thank you for having me.
So can you tell us, we just said your whole bio, but in your terms, in your personal
way. What does that
way,
mean?
Yeah, what is it? Please explain this to us.
Sure. Yeah. So maybe if I can, I'll back up a little bit. I'll tell you. So I grew up in an entrepreneurial family. So I started my first business at 17. I watched. I don't think my dad will mind saying this because it got better, but I saw him go bankrupt when I was quite young, and then I saw him rebuild quite successfully, and I was a part of those businesses. I think I was cheap labor, and so I swept parkades in a general maintenance contracting business, and did frozen meals packaging and delivery in a seniors business that grew to 25,000 meals a week that were being delivered, and so it was quite natural for me to start ventures, and so I co-founded and led a network of job boards across the country, including BCjobs, with a high school friend of mine that grew to be quite successful. And also started another one called Jobcast, which we realized there was a lot of demand in the Facebook directory for recruiting and no apps that did that. And so we brought LinkedIn style recruiting to Facebook and got 40,000 installs within 18 months. And so that was a crazy ride. We were finalists for Startup of the Year in 2015. And so February 2020 rolls around and I saw my network of job boards. And if anyone asks, I'm brilliant. I timed the market perfectly, understanding exactly what was going to happen. But the reality is that we just hit some real good dumb luck. And so I was going to be traveling the world. And then in March, I realized I was in lockdown with everybody else. And so that led me to start to reconnect with my Métis roots. This is a little bit of a long-winded intro. I hope that's okay, but I think it provides some context into the work. And so I've always been very proud. I was instilled by my dad, my uncles, my Métis heritage, and I'm mixed on my mom's side. I'm a Doukhobor and a Scouse. So I later learned that my grandfather, I knew him as Bill Craig. His given name was Ivan Svetlikov, and he spoke fluent Russian. And they were exiled from Russia in 1900. And so it's wild history. And so over COVID, you start to ask the question, what if I couldn't hear my mom and my dad's voices again? What if I couldn't, and fortunately everybody was okay. But it encouraged, I started to record everybody, and I started to interview family members, and that led to interviewing uncles and aunts. And I was really curious about the Métis side, because whilst I was very proud to be Métis, my grandpa died violently when I was 5 weeks old. And so he was that connection. So that led me on a journey, which is ongoing today. And I got my citizenship because tree work had been done and that sort of thing. But I learned all these fascinating things. Like my grandpa spoke fluent Michif and had status in Montana that he relinquished to go into the military. And, they knew they had an obligation to go to Hong Kong, and they knew that they couldn't win. So they sent the Indigenous folks over, right? Not solely, but, and so within 3 weeks of deployment, he was a Hong Kong POW, and his story was one of resilience. He came back and raised a family, but they add insult to injury. He lost an eye in a sawmill accident, and he used to take the eye out. He wasn't carrying around in a jar. He would take out his glass eye, and he would put it on the table, and he would look at my young infant and young children, uncles and dad, and say, I'm leaving, but I'm watching you. And so,
So he had a sense of humor. Sure.
oh yeah. And I know where my uncles got their sixth sense of humor. And so that led me on an ongoing journey. I went back to Batosh when it was safe to do so, and just, plopped myself down at different, tables for lunch with Métis families and got to know folks. And I've also been an ecosystem guy, like connecting people and bringing together community through my, we hosted the largest career fairs in British Columbia at one point for tech, and, had panel events. And so I just started to ask where the Indigenous Tech Circle, or where are the Indigenous tech people at? And people would respond that there aren't any. And I would, I hope it's okay to say this, but I would respectfully say, bullshit, I don't believe you. And so that led to conversations with folks like Joshua Nilsson, who we were just chatting about, and Jeff Ward, and, all these amazing folks, Hannes Edinger and Denny Carignan. And we just got on. It was COVID. We were bored. And so, and we had shared mission values and what we wanted to see in the world. We wanted to see empowerment for Indigenous people and equitable outcomes through technology. And so that's a long way back to kind of come to where we are, but I think it provides context into why I'm doing the work that I'm doing, because there's like lots of titles and things that are out there. But the reality is, it's just I realized my purpose through this was to, help to accelerate entrepreneurship, technology, and innovation. It used to be lonely to be Indigenous in tech, and what a lot of us in Tech Circle are saying now is it's not so lonely. And so that number grows so quickly. It's actually, I think, over 400 now, and it just keeps growing. And so the work that I do now is around that. So within Raven, they've got portfolio companies. So I'm on the investment committee, and I help them at the end of it there's a consensus basis to make selection. And then there's also, companies that need support. So I will we'll work with those companies, so we'll help them with whatever scenario they're going through in a lot of different areas. And the biggest part of my work today is really two pieces. It's I guess I'm effective. We've got a national nonprofit now, and we started to bring in some funding so that we can support more founders. And so that's part of my day. And but mostly it's, how do I connect more people? How do we support more entrepreneurs and give them mentorship and advice to help them to accelerate their growth? And then the other piece of that is I've just recently started a fund. So Indigenous Tech Fund is $20 million pre-seed fund, and we're currently raising on that and having some very good conversations. So that's sort of the next phase is, the term friends, family, and fools for an Indigenous entrepreneur is by and large a ridiculous statement. So how do we get more capital into Indigenous business early? It's very simple why they don't scale is because they can't afford to take the risk.
No, 100%. And I think for our listeners and for the non-techie people, when you talk about Indigenous tech and the technological industry right now, what does that mean?
Sure. Well, I think there's a lot of amazing folks leading the way that are, very successful tech professionals who happen to be Indigenous. Some of them are running Indigenous tech companies that focus on solving real problems in Indigenous communities. So you take like Lawrence Lewis, who runs Fun Feather, or, Anita Powlick with Race Rocks, or actually Anita's not. So she would be an example of another one that's just a very successful business that's Indigenous, and they, try to support Indigenous folks getting into technology. Denny Carignan runs Plato Tech, and I think they do something like 580 hours of QA testing and training with Indigenous team members that they onboard. And then once they're done training, they become consultants, and they've managed to partner with a lot of the big consulting firms and helps them with reconciliation. And they've found ways to allow Indigenous people to work on their nations and not have to leave. Because one of the big challenges, if you get successful in tech, then you get brain drain out of the nation, where they go and leave. And so, like, how can you stay in community and still have access to these opportunities? So it's pretty broad. There's everything in between. There's Josh Nilsson, who I know has been on the podcast, and he took Eastside Games. I don't know if he shares this. He's pretty humble, but I think he bootstrapped it to 100 million and then public on the TSX, right? So that's amazing. And through that, I know he has helped a lot of Indigenous folks. He's done so many things to support, including, creating scholarships and inviting folks in for internships within programming. And that lives on past his exit as well, too. And then there's also, like a lot of Indigenous tech professionals, right? So it's lonely to be Indigenous in tech when you're working at some of these big tech firms where it's like maybe you've got like one or two Indigenous people at some of the largest tech companies in the world. And we're all hearing about some of the things that are going on at some of them now and the reversals and such. So more than ever, it's important when you can't find your community within a company to have access to the broader ecosystem.
Yeah, I know it's amazing. From our point of view, we're working with kids with the Bears Lair youth camps, right? We're building businesses.
I love it.
It's very,
I love it, by the way.
very grassroots. It's as much as it is getting a little bit of confidence and understanding that there's a whole world out there. And it's good to leave, but it's also, you can still live at home if you want to in today's day and age. We also take place in, we work with nations and strategic planning and, what's going to be like when fiber gets here, right? Or when it's a good fiber. And so, I think the question that we always have and we like to bring to our communities is, it's noticeable in all communities, generally speaking, that, there isn't the equality you have of schools and the infrastructure. But once we get there, and I think we are getting there, or the communities that are getting it now, what can the future look like for the kids and how do we get them involved in tech? I'd love to get your point of view from that.
And I think, and just further, when you talk about tech with kids, like tech to kids would be creating games, coding, content creation, social media, those kind of things would be tech. It can be exciting for youth. And I think there's probably parents like us where when we hear tech, we like, no, thank you. Just because it's a pain point of either you have that side of the brain or that not side of the brain. And going back to where we learned on a Commodore 64, where we're coding just to start the computer. So
yeah, and then I'd say the other thing too is that there's jobs there for these kids that they're six figures and they can still live where they want to live, right? What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a huge opportunity. And the interesting thing about tech is like you don't need to ask for permission, right? Like a lot of these jobs are coming. Josh talks about all this time where they're becoming like blue collar jobs, and as I'm sure you share with a lot of folks, like not even in tech, just in general with business. And I do believe that most businesses of the future will be enabled by tech. So there's going to be tech in every type of business, and your career, whether you're starting a business or whether you're looking to work within a company, you can do it remotely. Right. So that's a beautiful thing. And that's become more and more common. And you can learn this stuff. Right. Like sometimes the verbiage and we're speaking different languages, so it can sound confusing. I can confuse people a lot of the time. If you hang out in tech too much, then nobody understands you. But it's a leveling of the playing field. And the interesting thing about business or like learning is you don't have to ask anybody for permission. We all learn in different ways. I've noticed that with Indigenous folks, including myself, we tend to learn experientially, right? So it's like, don't show me, like involve me, and then I will figure it out. And so I think the greatest gift that I was given was a computer, because I was an ADHD kid who was left-handed. So I was always staring out the window, and then I'd write things down and the teacher would look at it and go, "What do you write?" And I'd go, "I don't know." Right. And so when I got a computer, it helped me to organize things, and I didn't have the association of, maybe you're a little stupid, I don't think, and so with the computer, there wasn't there. And it's weird. I still have that kind of, with pens, there's still this kind of like negativity that comes out with me as well, too. Very mild at this point in my life. But, computer was game changing for me. And so, I think there's many paths, and I would say, who am I to say what folks should do? Like, if you want to be on the water, be on the water, right? If you want to be in the bush, do that. I think it's important to know that there is a pathway in technology and to demystify what it looks like. And I think that's why within Tech Circle, it's really important to elevate the good work that's being done, because there's so many amazing people that are starting companies that are working at Google and Workday and TELUS and Microsoft and and all the major companies out there. And so me as a Métis guy, I grew up playing lacrosse on the Squamish Nation. And if I went to my buddy Pete there and said, hey, like this is how you should do everything. And like, this is my path. It'll totally work for you. He'd probably kick me off the reserve. He'd probably have some choice words for me. Right. But if somebody else from community does that, then it makes sense. Right. Like, we've got all these great professionals, and, what the word Indigenous doesn't mean anything. It's like saying Chinese or sorry, no, Chinese is something. It's like saying Asian or Black or queer. Like, it's just this umbrella thing, right? Like, it doesn't define who we are as people. So by having diverse Indigenous voices in technology and more of us, then that goes back into our communities.
What do you think? How are you? Are there many Métis? I guess my question is, are there many Métis people in your tech circle? And what is the mandate of the tech circle? What is your mission developing this and the mandate of your tech circle?
Sure. Our goal is to create equitable outcomes for Indigenous peoples through technology. And I think that covers a lot. It's pretty broad based, but the goal is really just to elevate the good work that's being done to support the next generation, to grow businesses, to become software developers, to become programmers, and to build capacity, right? Because technology is used everywhere. Like, some will choose to start businesses, some will choose to go work at big tech, but a lot of folks will go back to their nations, and you see more and more of that, or they'll create solutions that are relevant to solving real problems within Indigenous communities. And so, we want to be there to support and nurture that next generation.
Yeah, and is it a not-for-profit? Is it a business? Is it a society? What?
It is. So Tech Circle is a national nonprofit. I never thought I would see myself. I guess I'm currently the chair and the acting CEO. I never saw myself as being a nonprofit CEO, but when it grew, it felt like the right thing to do, because it's not mine. We came together because of the strength of the community. And so I thought it was important to have proper governance within that, to have transparency within that. And so our board is amazing. Our board is like Altea from Raven Capital, Josh, Jeff Ward, Candace Loring, Alejandro Mayoral, Anita Pawlik, and Jesus, I'm missing somebody. Who am I missing right now? I apologize profusely because I'm missing somebody right now. But all these amazing folks have come together.
Yeah.
And so it was the right thing to do with that. And now the goal is sustainability within that. And I would like to see others, at a certain point, I'm here to create that sustainability and to support the growth. We've got some plans on programming that we're launching, and ones that we have piloted. We worked with 8 Indigenous founders last year, and they gave us 10 out of 10, all of them saying how it was impactful for them. And they got meaningful results from working with some of the folks. Like, we had 3 gaming companies that, Josh mentored, right? And I don't care if you're Indigenous or non-Indigenous, like, who else do you want to talk to start a gaming company, right? And so, Jeff Ward's son, actually, Aneem, who was with us today at UBC, he started Ego Experiments. He's got a gaming company going, and I don't think he's 20, but he's like, they contacted Steve Wozniak, and ended up getting in contact and having conversation with Steve Wozniak, because they didn't take no for an answer. All right. And so, like, to see they're getting into all the gaming studios and everything else, right? So when you see he is very successful, and he's going to be very successful whatever he does. I have so much admiration for him. And so, like, I think the work that you're doing, and then, like, education supports some, it doesn't support all. And then, hopefully that, some of them decide they want to get into technology as they get a little older, and then we need to create pathways. And there's, like, the contests that are created and the elevation that happens through your work. Powwow Pitch is doing a phenomenal job as well too. So I think, like, the more that our companies get celebrated, and then the more Indigenous entrepreneurs who are successful and support, like yourselves, that just creates, the next generation. We start to create generational wealth, and then we don't need to ask anybody for permission or for anything. We just create a circular economy and successful people that are living living the lives that they want.
And if someone wants to get involved with the tech circle, if it's a company or not, is it membership based? Is it program based? Is it
it is free. Like I did not want to get in the way of any Indigenous peoples and their communities. So for Indigenous folks to join, it's free. You just go to jointechcircle.com, and there's a form there, and then we'll connect you to the Slack channel. We host virtual events, and we do a lot of in person. We partnered with Collision Conference 2 years in a row, which is the largest tech conference in the world, and now it's Web Summit in Vancouver, and we're doing some programming about that to support companies in preparation for Web Summit. So the best way is really just to join on the site, and then you'll hear from us, and there's a lot of different opportunities to connect, learn, grow, and support others.
God, we have so many aspirations to work with you in the community. So it's great.
Yeah. I think it's such a good synergy. We've really, I think it's such a great time to be Indigenous as a youth, as with opportunity that has never existed before. Our parents, our grandparents, our aunties, and what have you have not gone through what they've gone through in vain, because there really is so much opportunity, and really have paved the way for people to amplify their voices that we are able to do right now and make a difference. And I know with the Bears there, when we start really young, and one of our guests, Leah Koss, that has Build-A-Biz Kids, when we met and you introduced us, even though you didn't know her, but networked us together, connected us together. The kids that she teaches are 6 years old, because we went, we teach kids 11 to 18. And she said, that's too old for me. We do kids 6 years old, not necessarily Indigenous kids like we do, but really teaching life skills in respect of, besides a business acumen, eye contact and public speaking and body language and social confidence and how to shake a hand, how to give business cards. So I want to put this to you. We're teaching that kind of social confidence when typically and traditionally, when people are in tech, they tend to be a little bit less extroverted and a little more introverted and especially nowadays when kids have their phone on their fused to their hand and they're sitting in front of a device all the times. And when it's a job and you're still in your computer. How do you find, and I know that you make such a difference, and Jeff and Josh, to be out there and speak your mind. And there's this mentorship and this, iconic individuals of success that can stand up and be mentors for these youth of today. How do you find that the social skills are of Indigenous people in tech right now?
The folks that I've met, I think are doing just fine in their ability to communicate. And there's always opportunities for improvement, especially if you're very technical. Like that's not an non-Indigenous kind of thing.
No. Yeah.
If you love coding, and I would say that that's okay too. But if you do want to start if you want to start a business, then you're going to need to surround yourself with folks that have different skills than you do. Like I've learned, it's funny. I mean, I've learned HTML, CSS, JavaScript, Ruby on Rails, working with a product, something called GitHub, which allows you to sync code and everything like that. And I can't remember any of it, because I never intended to be a software developer. I was just working with and leading software developers. Hopefully I had a good CTO. If I'm directly leading them, we're in trouble. But, I needed to know what they were talking about. And so for me, that was important to be able to communicate in their language as well. And so I think it depends on the role that you're playing. I think improving your communication skills is always going to be an important part of being successful. So, you don't have to be incredibly polished like somebody that does that for a living. Mm-hmm. Anybody who knows me will know I'm not incredibly polished anyways, and I do it for a living. So, but it's about getting outside your comfort zone and just being a little bit better every day and putting yourselves in a position to be successful and to navigate. And part of that, is always going to be being able to communicate, being able to negotiate for yourself and to build relationships in a good way with people and to yeah, and to grow.
It's just such a fascinating industry because with artificial intelligence and where that is going. So I think, what would your advice be for the youth to start looking for certain types of jobs that you think might be obsolete, and really narrowing down what do you think the biggest opportunities in tech would be for the next 5 years for youth that might want to be interested, or adults that might want to be interested in the tech industry, and where they should focus their efforts now?
Yeah, some people that are listening may curse me for saying this, but I think the only thing that you can really focus on now, given the rate and speed of technology and change, is just continuous improvement and learning. So it's more about meta learning and curiosity in terms of, and that can be done. I've met a lot of software developers that were self-taught, a lot of ones that went through boot camps, which is like a shorter term programming, and then some that have gone through university. And it's always interesting being in a room with folks and hearing the different perspectives on what makes you a successful software developer. And I don't think there is any one path to doing that, nor is there to being an entrepreneur, right? Like, even being an entrepreneur is like a deeply personal thing. Like, I've got a pre-seed fund that is launching, and that's a very specific type of funding. You have to work things backwards. Do you want to have a board? Do you want to have to hire people? Do you want to, be on a 10-year timeline, right? And do you want to build something that's really big that requires the cash, or do you want to go a little bit slower, maybe still build something really big? Right. So there's all these different pathways in life, whether it's, starting a business or choosing the career that you go down. I would say curiosity and passion is the biggest thing. And I encourage education in every way, shape, or form, but really all education is self-education. And I'm quoting, I think, Louis L'Amour right now, but the only thing that school can give you is the outline, and you have to fill in the colors for it. So just choosing all these tools. And I think it's really, you mentioned AI, ethically, there's a lot of things about AI, right? Full stop. And I think we need to have those conversations, those dialogues, and to start rewarding value that's being created and being, taken advantage by all these large language models. But it's also important, I think, as part of that conversation, to recognize that Indigenous peoples have been left behind in a lot of things for too long. And so, it's also important to explore these things at an individual level. And some of them are realities that you can't put the cork back in the bottle. So I would say a really important part is just understanding AI, because in order to be able to defend against things that shouldn't be happening, you do have to understand it and work with it. And there's just so much opportunity there that I would hate to see folks just kind of opt out, full stop, and say, we're not going to use any of these tools. It's like email. When email first came out, it gave a huge advantage to the few that used it. And, and people were excited when you got an email, right? Because you'd be like, this is special, right? And now, how many of us are excited about an email today when an email comes in, right? It becomes Oh God, I'm never going to get through these. I went on vacation it was glorious for 3 weeks, and I unplugged, and I came back and I went, what have I done? So with all these tools, there is that curve, right? Where it's exciting, it gives you an unfair advantage because you're an early adopter of it, and then everyone starts to adopt it, and then it becomes the default, and then there's no advantage. And so, similarly within AI right now, there's a few percentage of people that are using it overall, even though it's hyped as much as it is. And so those folks are getting an unfair advantage, but at a certain point, it'll just become the default. So I wouldn't want to see, our communities opt out of that. But, we do have to have a voice in how we can do it in a good way. And there's all these creators that, are,
yeah,
it's not good. Yeah.
It's interesting, and bringing that up and the values. Okay, so in all the organizations you're working with the Tech Circle and Raven Capital, and how is it a group of Indigenous people? But is there Indigenous values instilled? And if there are, is it the way that it operates? Is it just you as human beings? Is there, I don't know, something to the companies? Is there something different?
Well, I would say like individual companies are individual companies, so not to generalize, but I do see that there's clear like vision and values with a lot of the companies out there that are dedicated to, improving their communities. Sometimes that's not through, their application of their business that's doing that, but like a desire to really support, elevate, and even like hopefully some of these companies have exits and then they start investing in the next generation as angel investors. Like we need more of that, investing in our own businesses as a community. But I would say, in general speaking, I've noticed that the heart and the values within the community is very consistent. So there's a reason why Tech Circle grew so fast. Those values weren't mine that I put up on a corporate paper or, we ended up, so we collectively, I surveyed the willing at a certain point once I decided to jump into this. Maybe I'll back up. So like Tech Circle grew when I was doing other things. In 2022, I led an EdTech company that had gotten some funding from CMF, and in 2023, I did an M&A process and a bunch of advisory. And all the while, Tech Circle was growing in the background. And then I just realized at one point, I'm like, I keep doing these other things for money, and my heart's here. So I have no idea how I'm going to make it sustainable, but it's never stopped me before. And I'm like, okay, like there's something here. And I said, well, it's not for me to decide what this is. So I surveyed the willing of the core, not just anybody that was willing to, and there's core members and other, like just folks were willing to sit on a call, and I collected all that information. And from that, we developed our mission and values. And, we put it forth to everybody on a call, and everyone's heads nodded. We left it open for comments, and then we finalized it in January 2024. And I didn't say any of these things. Yet when I wrote it down and compiled it, Jeff Ward made it sound better because he's just a better writer than I am, right? And I could easily have written that out, and I think so could a lot of other people. And so those were Indigenous values, right? And I see it and I hear it when we're on stage, right? So that's the cool thing. It's not something that you can put on a piece of paper or dictate or that, but it's been the joy of my life, Tech Circle, and so the people are incredible, and they're doing incredible work that's heart-based, and they're navigating life with two-eyed seeing and trying to figure it all out, just like the rest of us.
Oh, great answer.
What are the core values?
It's a very good question. I'm horrible at reciting, but one is, I'm not going to give you exact ones, but I'll give you kind of like, one is like giving more than you take. Right, like this is a symbolic table where you bring more than you take away from the table. It's about continuous improvement and how do we word designing business in a good way, in our way, and iterating on that and creating, an Indigenous, like collectively learning, iterating on that business process, and continuously improving for future generations. Like, how do we build our own structures, our own system of doing business together? You know what? You've caught me, and I'm going to pop it up because I want to get it right in terms of celebrating contributions, so uplifting one another. Being of service, and sustainable growth, right? So, and I'm sure there's a lot else as well too that could be said on those ones. Like, we could talk about seven grandfathers' teachings and those things, and I think a lot of the things that we say maybe are said a little differently, but align with that. Mm-hmm.
Very nice.
Mm-hmm.
So, question about you. All of us have that either pivotal moment when we decide what we're going to do, but before that, we have a mentor. We have somebody that inspired us, or a few mentors if we're really lucky. Who is a person or people that have inspired you and mentored you? And maybe what kind of advice have they given to you going forward? Or the best advice you've ever got from a mentor?
So many. It's hard to. I mean, it starts with my father. There's a video of us, like he's in his 70s now, and he went into a boxing gym with me for the first time, and He was equally cute and tough. Like he was wearing his jeans, his East Band special, his jeans and a shirt and hitting on the bag. And but he also could hit that sucker, So like at 77, he's still willing to try new things. And I'm not, outing him on his age here, but still willing to try new stuff. And I grew up in an entrepreneurial family with my uncle Bob as well too. He gave us our first office space above his Flex Industrial where he was doing general contracting and just an incredible human being. Gruff, but just the nicest human being you'll ever meet. So I think early in my career, there was a lot in terms of business that I learned from them, and then once I got into technology, the business side, but just the values and how they showed up. Like my dad was willing, like when he was running his business, he'd show up and bring food and sweep the parkade with the folks that were working there, right? Or he'd go in and start cleaning the dishes at Rideau Manor when they got a contract at a seniors home, and then they doubled up to do frozen meals in the evenings on just volume. And I always remember how he showed up, and that we're all equal. I think that's the beautiful thing about Circle. Right, today at UBC, it was wonderful. We had Indigenous and non-Indigenous folks there, and we were going to do a panel initially. And I'm like, nah, let's, we all have something to say. Let's just hang out and get to know one another. So I think I learned a lot of my relationship building from my dad. And then as I got into technology and other things as well too, there's a lot of these great folks like Bill Tam from BC Tech. I don't know if you knew he was a mentor for me, right? Or Peter Payne, who was actually officially a mentor of mine for a period of time. And all these amazing folks. Cindy Pearson, who got us our first contract there. My friend Dan Rallahand at CGA, when nobody in their right mind would have brought us in to do a solution. The CTO asked for a P&L, and I said, a P and what? We had about 40,000 in revenue and a bunch of yahoos, and they gave us a contract to go in there, right? So I've been really blessed in that, and I think it takes. I think the biggest piece of advice is that it's okay to ask for help, and most people will support you in that in the ecosystem if you do. Sometimes we feel like we have to have it all figured out. I'm 48 years old now. I'm outing myself on my age, and I don't have a thing figured out, but I'm having an amazing life, and every day I learn something new. And so, continuously learn, ask for help, and be willing to help others.
Right on. If you were to give advice of all the best advice to, say, the young folks that are getting involved in business or tech, what would you say? What's your one piece that you found important, that you value?
So many, but I think maybe I'll say it's not black and white. It's not right or wrong. It's not pass or fail. Like, failure is more information. And so, like tests aren't designed for you to get a mark. They're designed for you to evaluate information and see where you're at. If it's information that's important for you to learn, study more and take the test again. Right? Like if you feel like you should be in a room and you're passionate about it, you don't fail if you don't quit. Right? And then if you don't want to do it anymore, quit and do something else. That's okay too, but do it on your terms because you choose to, not because you're afraid of looking bad or those kinds of things. Because I think we get locked up in guilt and shame sometimes and think like, and it's a shame when that paralyzes us because there's so much opportunity out there. And you don't have to ask permission for any of this stuff.
Love it.
Congratulations. Dean and I went to Collision last year and the year before as well. And to be able to have Indigenous Tech Circle there represented is huge. If a lot of our listeners don't know what the Collision Conference is it the largest tech conference in the world that comes to many places, but Toronto specifically in Canada. And it was so engaging and inspiring to see your face there and Jeff Ward and of course Josh and so Bobby Reset and so many different representatives that hold that large profile, but are doing things for the right reason. Currently, you have 300 members. What is your goal? Sorry, 400?
About 400, yeah.
About 400 members. Well, your bio says 300. So that needs to be updated.
It keeps updating so quickly that it's hard to keep track. Yeah.
What is your goal? So now that what is your goal in the next 5 years? What do you decide with your core members and your core 400 members? What is your goal in the next 5 years for membership with the Tech Circle, and where do you see yourself going?
Well, I think in terms of, I think Jeff says it really well when he says, I want people, when people think about Indigenous people, I want them to go, Indigenous people are really good at innovation and technology. Like that's their thing.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And we've always had these skills and this knowledge. And so, how do we blend our ways of knowing with, current technologies and we need our voices in technology because the world ain't doing so great. I go back and forth between existential dread some days, and then I realize that there's work to be done, and I put it away because there's still a lot of good. There's a lot of good in the world, but we need you to help the planet, which is a deeply Indigenous value, and so so I want people to see that and see the value and the innovation and technology that we have and that we're continuing expanding upon. So I don't know if that's very concrete in terms of goals, but I'd like to see us hosting the largest Indigenous Tech conference in the year. We're just planning for January of 2026 to launch an annual conference, and I want to see Indigenous folks from around the world. Like, how can we learn from one another?
Oh, cool.
So few of the many, but.
Mm-hmm. What an incredible goal. I know that part of our why was starting with the Bears Lair is we thought for a decade, why isn't there a show like the Shark Tank or Dragon's Den, but for Indigenous entrepreneurs that really upholds our values, breaks through the barriers and stereotypes of that we're not just located on reserve and be with all due respect to the beaters and the carvers and the weavers and the painters, but we're innovators. We're creating food sustainable systems. We're creating programs for language revitalization. We're working like the Tech Circle, Indigenous Tech Circle with just really providing and preserving our languages and our cultures. And the best way to do that is through technology now, because all of our knowledge keepers are fading away. And my brother says it best, that every time an elder dies, a library is burned down, because it's literally all of that knowledge and technology can really help with that. So one of my questions is, how can technology, not Indigenous technology, but how can technology help with preserving the culture of our people in respect of our languages and our stories and our legends? My brother has something, Shane Jackson, that has a story booth, and that's where it goes into community, and it's like a little longhouse hub. And he has a video camera and a microphone and a monitor there, and an elder can go in and just talk and it's documented as a library, but that's on a very small independent scale for a nation. But how do you think technology can help preserve our culture?
I think there's so many ways. It's really, that's not like there's, if you think about things like Duolingo, for example, why couldn't you have that for Indigenous language, right? And I know Michael Running Wolf and Caroline Running Wolf have done a lot of work in AI and language and that sort of thing. So using those models, there's, and I'm not the best person to talk on this, but from what I call with conversation with them, there's some commonalities within Indigenous languages that can demystify some of these things and make it so that you can look for the consistence, and that can be part of allowing us to gain access to a broader to language in a faster way, while still being keeping the integrity of it, and so I think those areas are huge. And then and it can be simple to heart, like if you look at, just being able to record folks on YouTube and being able to go and learn how to say a little bit of Mashif. My Mashif still comes out sounding like German. So I, like there's so many different ways from being able to record. I mean, now we've got Fireflies and tools like that, and Otter.ai, so you can like transcribe conversation and things like that. So many different pathways, all the online MOOCs and things like that, which allow you to create programming and such. So you just even using simple things like Kijiji or Thinkific and such doesn't have to be new. It's like it's interesting now because like most like, do we really need more widgets? I'm most interested in the things that really like have an impact on our planet in terms of technology. And so it's like tying AI to different things. Like how do you do it to create energy efficiency? Because the AI models like help to reduce the amount that you're using and understand peak times and all those kinds of things. But in terms of like language, it's not even that the technology's there. It's just the capacity and the time and like the to your point, we are rushing against time because a lot of that, those libraries are being burnt down every time somebody passes. So like the tools are here. And new ones will get created and they'll get improved. But I just look around at the things we use every day for education and go like, we should have something there. I'd love to see Duolingo come in and do a partnership on something. I think that would be incredible. So if Duolingo is listening, we're here.
I know they are listening because I'm learning Spanish and I'm about 5 days behind now. So
nice.
They consistently nag me.
No entiendo nada en español. I don't even know if I said that right.
It's pretty good.
Not bad. Dean speaks fluent Spanish. Incredible. Incredible.
I've got catchphrases. I ended up dating somebody from Mexico, but they all spoke English and wanted to work on their English. So I ended up just getting like bad words and weird like say phrases. Yeah.
The language of love. Very nice. Well, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. I guess in our last comment, or your last comment, how do you think the future is looking for technology? Right.
Right. I was at UBC today. We hosted a circle with Indigenous and non-Indigenous folks because there's a lot of founders out there that are doing, a lot of amazing solutions, and they want to know how to work with Indigenous communities in a good way. So a number of the Indigenous folks went out and were mentors. And there's two, aunties in the audience that, almost actually, I think they did bring me to tears at one point, but they brought themselves to tears saying like, I now have hope because I can hear from all of you, because we had a Neem who's, 18 and you have us, not me, because I said this again on there, is like my chip does come up, sound like German, and I will get better. It's coming. But you've got all these folks speaking in their language and they're confident about doing it. So, and we're occupying these spaces together, right? Like we had 65 of us end up at Microsoft, right? And it was weird for me because like going to Microsoft in and of itself kind of feels like a Tuesday for me now. As I'm sure if you went there, it's like, sure. Like, I've been in business a long time and I've been to tech events and stuff, and, the view's good and the food's nice and they've got some good bean bags and all that kind of stuff, but whatever. And it took one of the students to say, I never thought I would see myself with 65 other Indigenous professionals in circle occupying space here. And, like having that confidence because we were there together. And in that moment, I realized how special it was for me too, because I'd hidden in plain sight. Like I'm a lot of things, I'm a Doukhobor and a Scouse, and it's reclaiming that I'm also a very proud Métis.
Beautiful.
Amazing. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much, Ryan. It has been a pleasure.
So good to see you.
Yes, so good to see you. And we look forward to working with you in the future because we've got big plans as well.
Yeah, so I'm signing up right after this.
Yeah.
There's whiteboarding to be done. I'm very excited.
Whiteboarding to be done. You got it.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you for sharing your story. Thanks for listening to Beyond the Lair. Please follow us, download this episode, and follow us on social media on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and TikTok.